Oh, good. Well, now that Mr. Foreman is here, we can get this meeting started. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the April 10th, 2024 meeting of the Brentwood Planning and Zoning Commission. We'll call the meeting to order, and if you could please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Moran, could you please call the roll?
Yeah, Mark Vazza.
Here.
Matt Foreman is here. Jeff Hunt.
Here.
Carl Carlin.
Here.
Paul Moran here. John Ritter.
Here.
Hart Nelson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Moran.
Uh,
Next item of business, the minutes from our February 14th Valentine's Day meeting have been distributed. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Any corrections or changes need to be made? If not, any objection to approval by acclamation? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. Next item of business is citizen comments. This is for any citizens wishing to address the Planning and Zoning Commission on items not already on the agenda. Does anyone wish to address the commission? Sir, if you could please approach, state your name and address. You do have 3 minutes.
My name is Don Kaiser. I have 2 Brentwood Forest condominiums, 9165 Robin Court, 9148 Eager. My question is trying to figure out what the permitting process was for the decks on my 2 condominiums. My efforts to try to ascertain how old those decks are have proven unsuccessful with Brentwood Forest. The city clerk here kindly responded that there was no permits on file for those decks. I was hoping that perhaps with a permit I would know when they were built and who built them and what they were built out of. And so I've not been able to obtain that. My question is, did Brentwood Forest for any period of time have some sort of blanket permitting process where they could achieve 1 permit and built multiple decks that would explain why there are no permits on file for my 2 properties? Those are my only questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Kaiser. The commission, to my knowledge, doesn't permit, well, certainly don't permit anything, but I don't believe we review anything for decks that wouldn't come to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm not sure if it ever has historically, but not on my time in the commission, which has been, I think, about 6 years now. So I'd ask that staff, if you could look into that to the extent possible and provide Mr. Kaiser with a response, I would appreciate that.
Yes, we've received a sunshine law request asking for permits for his 2 properties. We have nothing on file. I'm not aware of any blanket Brentwood Forest permit decks. I could try to do some deeper research, but I'm not aware of anything. State law only states that we only have to keep building permits for 5 years. So anything further than that, we probably may not have. I have some electronic copies of some things, but not everything, so.
Yeah, Mr. Kaiser, the commission isn't something that would normally come to. So again, appreciate it, the chance to work with staff on that. Thank you. Thank you.
Harding, I live at 8881 Flamingo Court, also in Brentwood Forest. My wife lived in Audubon in 1972 before they were converted to the condominium complex. And she mentioned that there were no decks in the back at that time. It was all concrete steps. When Audubon was converted after they became a Section 8 entity, the developer, Jefferson Savings, had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted because the city of Brentwood at that time was so interested in getting rid of the blighted Audubon Park. In fact, police were even very reserved in even entering the property in those days in the late 70s. I had an opportunity while living there to view 90 different units with the maintenance supervisor over the 31 years I've lived there. And I noticed a lot of a lot of weaknesses in construction, foundation, things that should have been done that weren't done. I've been searching for records of my own on decks because I have a deck that is a designated as a developer deck, which means it was developed by the developer to incentivize purchase of my unit. So my 182 square foot deck is larger than the footprint of the average deck. So I went to the recorder of deeds in Clayton to verify the description of my deck and the 182 square feet. And so I'm concerned if the city exercises any kind of limit on restricting Brentwood Forest to go back to the original footprint, because I've been paying taxes and paid extra for my unit that had this deck that's like no other in Brentwood Forest. And as far as records go and permits, the only time permits have been explored with the city of Brentwood through Brentwood Forest was when CPM was hired, and Bob Beasley has been making inquiries to get proper permits for deck construction. Before that, there were very little, if any, corroboration from the city of Brentwood on any deck improvements in the city of Brentwood. So I'm concerned, like Mr. Kaiser, with what's going on or what may come down the pike in Brentwood Forest, because if the city wasn't giving permits for deck repairs or replacements, and there's no record of that happening, I'm concerned with how the city could ever force us to go back to the original footprint, which wasn't an original footprint because the developer went from concrete steps to decks made out of wood, overriding the steps. So I'm concerned, as Mr. Kaiser is, with the lack of records in Brentwood Forest after living there 31 years, being on the board 9 times, still not able to locate or ascertain any documentation on deck repairs or replacement corroborated with the city of Brentwood. Thank you.
Understand. Thank you, Mr. Hardy. I think maybe we'll get some information on that before our next meeting, if we could, just to make sure we understand the situation and the relevance to the Planning and Zoning Commission, since this isn't something that normally would be our purview, but I think that's kind of where we're at.
So the Brentwood Forest is condo plat, did show specific deck sizes, and as part of the condo plat, which was reviewed and approved at the Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Aldermen, modifications to the decks, or if they want to expand those decks, would require new review of the condo plat that would come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Aldermen. And our attorney, Stephanie Carr, has submitted a letter to that effect to Brentwood Forest.
When was the last time, to the records, that we have had that review in front of the commission? Is that something that you have?
It was originally, when they originally did it.
Okay, so again,
Yeah, we'd have.
I was gonna say, not in the last 6 years, so not in the last 30 or 40 or more, so, okay, understanding. All right, thank you, that context. All right, next item of business is old business. This is P&Z 2402. Sorry, this is text amendments to Division 2 Home Occupations of Article 5, Supplemental Regulations of the City's Zoning Ordinance to comply with recent state regulation. We did have a significant discussion, I think some suggestions for staff, and I believe there is a staff report on those updates for us to review. I'll turn over to Ms. Kelly.
So in your packet is the revised language. The large part of the discussion was on parking for customers. Mr. O'Keefe has provided additional language for consideration that includes that customer parking related to the home-based business cannot interfere with the use of the public parking by other residents in the vicinity, and B, may not be contrary to any parking regulations then in force, and C, may not impede or interfere with vehicular use of the street or safe passage of emergency or street maintenance vehicles. Employee parking still requires that they provide enough off-street parking for the employees. Then he also included specific language regarding how to appeal if there's revoke of those licenses. Kevin, if you want to jump in and provide additional explanation.
We've added a provision allowing the
Mr. O'Keefe, I assume that this would obviously meet the requirements for the state's, the legislation that was passed, so.
I would also add the question regarding occupancy load. The building code does not include that, but we did note that in the fire code, it limits residential structures to 200 gross square feet per person. Therefore, if you have a 2,000 square foot home, you would have, the maximum occupant load would be 10 people. That would come into play.
Again, I recall we had a very lengthy discussion, detailed discussion, not necessarily lengthy, but detailed. I believe that addresses the concerns that I can recall. Do any members of the commission have any other questions for staff or Mr. O'Keefe? Any members of the public wishing to address the commission on this item? If not, I think then the action on this is a recommendation to move this to the Board of Aldermen. Is that correct? Is that
Correct.
what we're looking for?
It will need to go to the Ways and Means Committee prior to going to the Board of Aldermen. So next Ways and Means is April 30th, and then we would work to, following their direction, work to get it scheduled for the Board of Aldermen.
Entertain a motion at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend approval of the text amendments for Division 2 Home Occupations of Article 5 Supplemental Regulations of the City's Zoning Ordinance as presented in this meeting.
Been motioned by Mr. Moran. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Carlin. All in favor? Actually, we need a roll call vote on this. We probably do. Do a roll call vote, please.
Okay. Mark Favaza,
Yes.
Matt Vaughan,
Yes.
Jeff Hunt, Carl Carlin,
Yes.
Paul Moran, yes, and John Ritter. Yes. That's unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Next item of business is new actually, hold on, excuse me. We got one more. Yes. Yeah, we have new business, but this one is requesting postpone. So we have P&Z 2403. This is a comprehensive sign plan for 1234 Hanley Industrial Court, and we've received a request to postpone this to the May 8th P&Z meeting. Any updates from staff?
No, they were going to be out of town tonight, so they asked to postpone it to the May 8th.
Yep. Do you have a motion to continue this to the May 8th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting? Been motioned by Mr. Hunt. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Favaza. I think a voice vote on this will suffice. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. We will carry that over. Next item is P&Z 2405. This is the amendment to ordinance numbers 3619 and 4863 for the conditional use permit and site development plan for McDonald's at 1595 South Hanley Road for modifications to the building elevations. Is the applicant or their representative here this evening? If you could please step forward, state your name, tell us a little bit about the proposal, and then we will have staff report after that.
My name is Matthew Corti, 333 Commerce Street in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm the civil engineer for the project. The applicant is actually the architect for the project, but they could not be here tonight. So you got me. But yes, the majority of our project is modifying the building, both interior and exterior, to improve the kitchen functionality primarily, and then to revise the building elevations to the current McDonald's standards so it looks a little bit more modern than what the existing building is. As part of that, we've also provided a landscape plan, which I know that's some of the comments that staff has provided, is to make sure that our landscape plan improves the existing facilities at the site and brings things back up to a good standard. I know there's some damaged plant material, some plant material that needs to be replaced, maintained, and we have a revised landscape plan that addresses the comments shown on this screen that essentially matches exactly what the comments ask it to do. So we believe the landscape plan is good to go. Okay. Okay. We will make sure you get it.
But I'm understanding that the applicant has agreed to do to comply with the comments made in the
Yes,
the
correct.
staff report. Okay, so that's good to note.
And there were also two other concerns, I guess, from the city staff. One of those concerns was related to the exit of the building on the southeast corner of the building. We are modifying the way that the door swings in that particular location. So instead of coming straight out like you would head towards the right-of-way, you'll now be exiting and heading more towards the southern part of the building, so. Yeah, so the blue door right there, or the blue outline, is where the door will be relocated to. And that's primarily for deliveries for mobile order. So the kitchen staff or the staff at the store would bring things out, deliver it to folks that have mobile ordered, or things like Uber Eats, DoorDash, things like that. So one of the concerns was that there was a pedestrian safety potential issue there. Obviously, if they're walking straight at that blue door, that we don't want people to just walk straight out into the drive-through and potentially get hit. So you'll see in the picture there is actually a guardrail in the existing condition. We do propose to maintain that guardrail so that people, when they do walk out, they wouldn't be walking straight out. They would have to turn and navigate around that guardrail. So hopefully that addresses the pedestrian safety concerns. It's possible that we could extend that guardrail a little bit further to try and wrap it around that curve, but the standard for McDonald's is to always have a guardrail specifically there for that purpose.
Turn it over to staff report. Ms. Kelly, please.
So the applicant indicated, so this is an amendment to ordinance 3619 and 4863 for the conditional use permit. 4863 specified approval of the elevations. Therefore, this change required an amendment to that ordinance as well. They did receive a site coverage bonus of up to 76% in 1998. Therefore, we had Andy take a look at the landscaping, and he provided those comments, and he's here, he can address those. Lee Cannon, the city's traffic engineer, did not feel like a full traffic study was needed due to the limited scope of the project, but he did note the pedestrian concern as they would walk out directly into that line of drive-through lane. So if the commission is satisfied with the applicant's statement tonight, they can move it forward, or we could have him look at additional, if anything additional is needed for that.
Ms. Kelly, in the records, the additional coverage was allowed because of improvements to the site. Is that the
Correct.
understanding? Okay, and so that would be then the updated landscaping plan would be of a similar nature to what was originally approved in terms of the reason for allowing additional coverage. If that makes sense?
Yes.
Okay.
We haven't seen the the revised landscape plan.
With the assumption that the recommendations made by Mr. Frankie were accepted.
Trust, yes.
Okay.
So,
Understood.
but he's here. Also included is that in the future, St. Louis County is looking to do some streetscape and sidewalk improvements along South Hanley. They have asked that we record that the applicant would agree to cooperate and donate any property rights needed for the area. They intend to just build the new site, replace the sidewalk mostly in the same configuration and footprint, and with a permanent easement for perpetual maintenance and replacement needs shown in the purple. The green would be a temporary construction lease for working room to make it all fit in. So that is a condition of approval. I had asked the applicant if they're okay with that. Specified before now if they are, so.
I can confirm, we have been working with McDonald's Real Estate and the owner-operator for this location, and they're willing to work with the county and the city to make sure that taking and the construction easement can continue.
So that is also a condition of that approval. So if they're amenable, then that doesn't further. But Andrew is here, and he can discuss the landscaping if you'd like to hear from him specifically.
I think that the commission probably would. So if you don't mind taking a seat, we'll call you back up in just a sec when we get to questions. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Andrew Frank. I'm a landscape architect with Planning Design Studio. I'm your city's on-call landscape architect. As you can see, I assume the drawing's up.
Yep.
Yeah, we went out there and walked the site and took kind of an inventory of all the landscape material. and made some comments. Looked like a lot of comments. There was a lot of plant material that was just missing, needed to be replaced. There's several ash trees that probably need to go as well, just because of the impending emerald ash borer. It's not impending, it's here, and it's doing what it does. So we made these comments. We haven't seen the plans, so we haven't really kind of put this up against it to see if they've addressed everything. We did, I think, their landscape architect talked to me, and we went through the comments, so they have a pretty clear understanding. Do you have any questions? Anybody have any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Frankie from the commission?
Yeah, thanks. Kind of like dyslexic when it comes to reading these things. They don't make sense to me. I like spreadsheets and words, not pictures. The wall, the windows are being replaced. Windows are being replaced with brick, and the comment was that's going to look very monotonous. Not sure that's the word I would use, but that's fine. Are we going to put any plants in the way to make that wall look less like a prisoner cell block?
That might be that would be the applicant. But those are windows that, if you see here, these are the existing windows that will be blocked off. And it would be, use a CMU that would match the existing CMU and match. You know, and as you know, we're going through the architectural design guidelines, but we pull from the MC district, which talk about having more windows and not having monotonous. So if you don't feel like it is monotonous, that is your call. I just suggested that that might be something to discuss with the applicant, if there's any smaller windows that could be pulled in, or if not, and you're fine with it, then you would make a recommendation to the board. Yeah.
Those aren't.
No,
Those are the, south elevation. Yeah, okay.
So this is the south elevation. These are the two drive-up windows.
Yeah.
And then they're blocking what would be these windows here. And this one would become the door. Yeah. So it's existing masonry here. Yeah. This window would then become the door. Right. There's not really anywhere to put plants.
I was
That's
trying to
what-
come up with a
that's what we were getting
trying to
at,
come up
yeah.
with a solution, like
that.
a few plant pots. Like I was trying to come up with a $25 solution. You know. Thank you.
Yep.
I will. Here, let's do.
I bet it does. There you go.
All right, now we're rolling. Rock on. Now I need a giant laser pointer.
Okay.
That's good. That's good right there. There you go. Right across from that window, right where Whitney's pointing, there's only one small shrub rose left, and we recommended that they replant that. So the plants that we that they're replacing aren't real tall, so they're really not going to make that much of a visual impact. But there'll be a little bit of planting that if you're in the Home Depot lot, you might see some plants there. It's kind of difficult there. If you put something real tall, you could block somebody as they're turning from a view thing, a sight triangle issue. But the petitioner, if they, once we see their plan, they'll probably comply with that. So, okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Moran? Yep, please.
Yeah, and then no, that was it for landscape and stuff. Thank you very much, Andy. And we kind of touched on the pedestrian railing, but we just kind of, we'll change that maybe if we have to. Can you be a little bit more specific, please? Because it did sound like it could use a bit of love, right, to make it totally safe.
Yeah, so the existing guardrail there is the McDonald's standard, is just to have a guardrail right there so that as people are walking out, and you can see in the red image there, somebody's actually coming out of the door, going back in. But that typically would prevent somebody from exiting the door and immediately turning right and going into the drive-through area. as you can see, the blue kind of relocating further away. If you were to walk straight out that door, the swing of the door is going to come back towards where the existing door is. So if you are walking out, the guardrail does still prevent you from going immediately into the drive-through lane, but there is a little bit of a gap there around that curvature there that would be relatively open, that if someone were to exit that blue door, they could potentially just step
I have a question.
Any other question, Mr. Moran? Or did you want to make
Well,
a
I just wa- I
recommendation to
just w-
extend that,
I
perhaps?
just wouldn't underestimate people's ability to walk in front of a car.
So I think there
yeah,
might be some interest from the commission, is what I'm hearing, to extend that guardrail out, since the door is being relocated, and to extend that so that it would in fact physically block someone from walking straight out the door, even with the swing of the door. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions, Moran? Mr. Carlin?
Can you go to the floor plan view right above there? Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure why you have the door swinging the way you do. Like, if the goal is to prevent people from walking into traffic and or walking into a dead corner, kind of like in the Animal House when the marching band walks into that alley and yeah. So in other words, if you flip that door swing the other way and pushed it to the plan left, and with the guardrail, then they're only going to be able to go essentially out toward the right of way as they originally did, right? So this is kind of odd because you're sort of going to get wedged between the limit of the door swing and the rail and just kind of be stuck there, right? Yeah. And if you change the swing and then for ADA purposes push the door all the way to the left, because you'd have to do that, right? Then you'll also get rid of the dead trash corner, that's gonna gonna form in the vortex there. So I would base my approval. I don't have any problem with anything else you're talking about. It's all fine with me, but that's a significant problem, I think. So
Anything else, Mr. Carlin? Mr. Foreman?
So judging by the plan, and there's not an occupancy table on the code sheet in the front, you're reducing the seating in the building. You're putting in the digital kiosks, et cetera. So the amount of seating is being decreased, the kitchen area is being increased, and you're making it easier for mobile walk-up ordering inside without counter space, and making more of accommodation for Uber Eats, et cetera. Given the seating change, would there need to be a commensurate reduction in required parking?
Our parking is based upon the square footage of the building,
Not on the seating area?
not on the
Okay.
seating. So I did not do a parking review since the building's not being changed.
Because that also rolled into the egress, because you now only have as I recall, way back in the day, there was a door going out of the west end of the dining area, but now these are the only two doors. Part of my brain goes to remoteness and occupancy calculations, which I'm not seeing, but I don't think we've made it worse than it is today. And we're reducing the occupancy load in the building.
And generally, the expansion of the kitchen and update of the kitchen facilities, that should be better on the traffic flow at the site as well. McDonald's typically has somewhere around 70 to 80% of their business through the drive-through anyway. So this kind of streamlines it and helps them be able to provide faster service and better service for the customers, but also should improve some of the traffic flow at the site as well. So.
Sorry, any other questions, Mr. Foreman? Any other questions from the commission? Anyone in the public? Please approach. You need to come up to the podium. Please state your name and address again, please. Wait, please, if you don't mind, please wait till you're at the microphone. It is being recorded. That's why we're sticklers about that.
Joe Harding again, 8881 Flamingo Court. My wife and I are weekly visitors to this McDonald's. The caramel frappe particularly. But in the drawing with the red and blue doors, the takeout lane actually starts at the entrance pulling off of the street. So the entrance that goes around the building starts there, right where the door to go in and out is. I never pre-order. I always walk in that door and out that door. And what I've noticed is everybody's very careful in and out, even with the railing as it exists right now. So I don't see a big change or a big need to make that extended because you don't have a lot of choice when you come out the door. So I usually park to the right, go in, order, take out, walk out, and go back in the parking lot, and then pull around the building and exit back onto the street. So somebody on this commission or committee suggested that you needed extended that, but you don't have a lot of choice once you get out of the door, even when they change the way the door is now. Everybody seems very cautious because you have cars coming in, going around the building, getting their order and coming out. So it's all entrance and exit is right there at the front where that door is. And everybody is pretty much, the customers are very careful, including me. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Harding. All right, anyone else? No, it's Mr. Foreman.
Sorry, I'm going to be pedantic because of the railing conversation. The railing in the elevation is actually incorrectly shown. So where there's, it should be
Actually be further to the right.
correct. And there should actually be a line in the elevation in the masonry where there's going to be a corner in the masonry, and that railing should start to the right of that line in the masonry.
Important. Excellent to note, and I appreciate you clarifying that, Mr. Foreman.
We can work with the architect to try and get that cleaned up a little bit as well.
So, what is the will of the commission at this point? Do we have a motion? I do believe there will probably be some conditions of approval on this, but we may be able to leave those for staff to confirm that the landscape plan meets the recommendations, but it is up to the commission.
I could make a motion if it includes the change to the door swing.
I believe that's something that we're allowed to do. Is that correct, Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Kelly? All right, excellent. Mr. Carlin, do you have a motion?
Give it a shot here.
Let's just make sure, yeah, with the conditions.
I move to recommend approval of the site development plans and revised conditional use permit for the McDonald's restaurant at 1595 South Hanley Road as presented in the staff report and drawings with the additional change to the door swing as noted in the minutes of this meeting. Reviewed at the April 10th Planning and Zoning Commission.
We have motion, let's get a second here. Do we have a motion and a second? Do we have a second? Sorry.
Do we want to mention the landscape plan as well?
That landscape plan is in there as number 2.
Yep.
As the condition.
Yep.
I was just wanting clarification if we wanted to shift the door as well. Shift it and switch.
Oh, shift it or change the swing? That's what you suggested.
He said change the swing, but he also earlier mentioned shifting it a little bit too.
Railing location. Bundle it all
All right,
together.
I'm going to try again.
Revised motion.
I move to recommend approval of the site development plans and revised conditional use permit for the McDonald's restaurant at 1595 South Hanley Road as presented in the staff report and drawings with the additional conditions of the change of door swing, the shift to the left plan for door swing, and the correction of the rail and building joint line as incorrectly portrayed in the elevation, as discussed in the meeting, reviewed at the April 10th Planning and Zoning Commission.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Favazza. Any further discussion from the commission? Did we capture what we needed to in the motion? Excellent. Roll call vote, if you could, please, Mr. Moran.
Mark Favazza,
Yes.
Matt Foreman,
Yes.
Jeff Hunt,
Yes.
Carl Carlin,
Yes.
Paul Moran, yes. John Ritter,
Yes.
again unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. This recommendation will move forward to the the Board of Aldermen. And what was the date again, Ms. Kelly?
I will confirm with the applicant, but the earliest I could get them on would be
May 20th meeting is the expectation, or at least the intent, so confirmed with the applicants. Thank you very much. All right. Next item of business. New business is P and Z 24, excuse me, no, this is not. This is, my apologies. This isn't a P and Z anything. This is a presentation. We have H3 Studios on the development of the architectural design guidelines. Is a representative here with us this evening? Ms. Kelly, do you wish to give any overview, introduction to this, or how would you prefer to handle it?
Yes, H3 Studio is here for a preliminary discussion on largely the commercial development of the design guidelines. Once they have met with the Sustainability Commission, tonight they're meeting with you. Next week, they'll meet with the Architectural Review Board to discuss residential designs of what you want to see. This is the preliminary. Then they will come back, and they'll also meet with the aldermen. They will come, once they develop a draft, they would like to come back to all of the committees, and then we'll have a number of public hearings, or, I'm sorry, not public meetings, sorry, open workshops with the public to get the public's input as well, but anyone is welcome to attend any of these meetings and provide input. So he's here Tim Brahan is here with H3 Studio just to walk through that process and to get your feedback tonight on what you would like to see within the design guidelines.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to your presentation. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you all. Again, my name is Tim Brahan with H3 Studio, and Whitney, you'll be driving the presentation, I think. So maybe if we just want to go ahead and start on the agenda slide.
And this is also in the packet if you wish to follow along.
So as Whitney mentioned, what we'd like to do tonight is just to give a quick overview of the process, a summary of some of the existing conditions analysis, because part of the process is to develop essentially a character survey of the entire city of Brentwood as part of the development of the guidelines, and then have a little bit of discussion and feedback from you all based on, to get input on issues related to commercial development in particular that the Planning and Zoning Commission addresses. So if we go to the next slide, please. The overall objective for the project is to develop citywide residential architectural design guidelines for all of Brentwood's residential properties, as well as commercial architectural design guidelines for Brentwood Boulevard south of Strassner Drive and the West Manchester corridor. So essentially the main corridors that are not currently under guidelines, which is the East Manchester corridor area. And the intent of the guidelines is multifold, but it includes helping to provide consistent direction to the ARB in the review and approval of projects, and that would actually extend to P&Z as well. To clearly define the review and approval process between what the boards and commissions can review and approve and what city staff can review and approve. Provide additional legal backup to review and approval decisions by boards, commissions, and staff. Clarify requirements and expectations for property owners and developers, and address persistent design review issues. Next slide, please. So this process is structured, as Whitney was mentioning, around several modes of community engagement. There is a project steering committee, of which I know a number of you serve on. There will be 4 total meetings with the Project Steering Committee. We did already have our first meeting back at the end of last year. There will be a series of 10 total meetings with various boards, commissions, and the Board of Aldermen. Essentially 2 meetings with the Sustainability Commission, 3 meetings with you all, 3 meetings with ARB, 2 meetings with the Board of Aldermen. There will be 4 meetings each for focus groups of commercial and residential property owners. Finally, 2 public open houses basically to occur when draft guidelines are developed and then when the final guidelines. So now we'd like to go through kind of a very brief summary of some of the overall existing conditions. And this is important because in order to really have these effective guidelines, there needs to be a well-understood documentation of the existing character of Brentwood. And so we start this, next slide please, by really looking at some of the underlying kind of landform and geographical conditions of the city. Obviously the Brentwood is quite hilly, being located just at the confluence of Deer Creek and Black Creek. You have, over 120 feet of elevation change, and the southern and eastern portions of the city, as you all well know, are heavily impacted by the floodways and floodplains of those two creeks. Next slide, please. And interestingly, those are also some of the areas of Brentwood that are the most heavily urbanized in terms of impervious surface coverage, which is what this map shows in a composite. So if we go through that, sort of building it up, looking at the streets and roads on the next slide, and then building footprints, you can clearly see just in this figure ground map the vast difference from different quadrants of the city based on the historical building development from the residential sections into various commercial corridors. The next slide shows non-vehicular paved surfaces, so any patios, sidewalks, things like that. And the next slide layers on the parking lots and driveways. And so what we see here is that approximately 46% of Brentwood is covered by impervious surface. And in the next slide, we can see that much of that is overlaid by the floodplains. And in fact, over 60% of Brentwood's total floodplain area is covered by impervious surface, which, as you can imagine, has a number of negative impacts in terms of stormwater runoff, water quality issues, et cetera. And then moving on to the next slide, another thing that is a very important asset and existing condition that Brentwood possesses is transit access and the potential impacts that will have on future development. There are essentially 3 Metrolink stations serving the city, one located within Brentwood, 2 additional stations located within a quarter mile of the city. You can see on the next slide those red circles. That is the quarter-mile walking radius. So those are properties that are within approximately a 5-minute walk of Brentwood. It's about 15% of Brentwood's total land area. And in the next slide, you can see those areas that are within half a mile or a 10-minute walk, increasing that to about 30% of the entire area of the city. So again, I think, while a lot of the transit-oriented or transit-adjacent areas are currently business or industrial development, over time, there will likely be increasing development opportunities for more traditional mixed-use transit development. So we want to make sure that the design guidelines moving forward are adequately addressing those opportunities. Then on the next slide, we looked at land use. And so this is land use as classified by the St. Louis County Assessor's Office. These are tax record classifications of properties. A significant amount of Brentwood is residential, but of course you do have the 2 major commercial corridors. The next slide, this is actually some interesting work. Our firm is part of the consulting team that is developing the St. Louis County 2050 Comprehensive Plan. As part of that plan, we have conducted, our firm is focused on land use as part of the team. And so we conducted a detailed community place type analysis of the entirety of St. Louis County. This is an excerpt of that analysis focused on Brentwood. And essentially there are 9 community place type classifications out of the total of 28 that were identified for the entire county. that occur within the city of Brentwood. What is interesting about this is that it really shows how Brentwood is kind of at the boundary of traditional suburban neighborhood development, which is and the much kind of larger, more estate subdivision type development that occurs to the west. And Brentwood has a little bit, it has a lot of traditional suburban neighborhoods. It has a little bit of the estate neighborhoods, but it shows that, you know, again, as a community, you're kind of on that boundary between what would be classified as traditional inner ring suburbs and more of the kind of classic early 20th century state subdivisions that you see in Ladue and going out west. But again, highlights the variety of residential types within Brentwood. And then looking at the commercial area, you know, it should come as no surprise to you all that Brentwood, particularly along south of the I-64 corridor, that is a significant regional residential and commercial draw. And then the next slide shows the current zoning classifications within Brentwood. So, and this is something that you are all, I'm sure, very familiar with, but if we kind of move on to the next series of slides, we'll show some of the special overlays that currently exist. So the Manchester corridor, which is a zoning district, it has its own architectural design guidelines. You see that they're highlighted. There are essentially 3 subdivisions along the western edge of the city that have indentures and or deed restrictions, York Village, Whitehall, and the Park Ridge subdivisions. So those provide additional restrictions or guidance on building design. And then in terms of the Brentwood 2020 Comprehensive Plan, and this is clearly the focus of this guideline update process, there are 2 focus areas that are called out in that plan, first being the Brentwood Town Center Commercial Subdistrict, highlighted in red, and then on the next slide, the West Manchester Commercial Subdistrict. And these are both the focus areas for the commercial design guideline components of this. So the next slide has a list of issues and opportunities that have been preliminarily identified through the engagement process so far. I'll just run through those. So first, there's no defined checklist in the city for residential submittals, which increases difficulty and uncertainty for everyone involved. We also heard through initial engagement with ARB that there's a feeling that ARB does not believe they are fully empowered to deny projects because of a lack of defined guidelines. Commercial projects are not required to be reviewed by ARB, only by the Planning and Zoning Commission, so there's a difference between residential and commercial in that sense. The zoning code does not currently have floor area ratio limits to govern building size. It's expected that Brentwood will continue to experience tear downs and rebuilds of both commercial and residential properties due to increasing property values. Currently, only replacement in kind and installation of solar panels can be administratively approved by staff for residential projects. Subdivision indentures and deed restrictions are more restrictive, but there's no defined process for enforcement of these requirements, and legally the city is not empowered to do so. And finally, when we met with the Sustainability Commission, they expressed that there is a general perception that there's a lack of clear direction about sustainable building systems and site treatments, and when and where those can be employed in projects, which increases confusion and makes implementing some of those practices more difficult. So that concludes the presentation, and so what we've just outlined some preliminary topics for consideration that we'd invite you to provide any thoughts you have tonight, and these would include things like commercial parking requirements, location of parking, and the design of parking facilities. Stormwater and green infrastructure for commercial properties, including landscaping treatments for parking lots, public realm landscaping and other commercial site design principles, commercial building materials and building articulation, building and site signage and lighting, future opportunities for transit-oriented development, and any other topics that we haven't listed here that would be pertinent to commercial building design. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions that you may have, and certainly we would welcome tonight any feedback that you have on any of these topics or others that we can then begin to incorporate into the first draft. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan, for the presentation. We'll turn it over to members of the commission. Any comments or questions?
Yeah, I just got a couple, please.
Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you give me an example of what transit-oriented development is, please?
So let's see. So typically, a transit-oriented development would be a development that is supported by access to transit and typically supportive of transit. So probably the best examples in the St. Louis area would be found in University City and in kind of the western edge of the city of St. Louis along Delmar Boulevard, where you have access to Metrolink, and you have mixed-use development along the Delmar corridor, including some higher density residential uses. You do see some of that in this part of town. You know, the Hanley Station development, which is right next to the Metrolink but actually doesn't have access to the Metrolink, is probably characteristic of more suburban TOD. The area down around the Sunnon Station is a good example of more of a commercial TOD. And in fact, what you see at the Brentwood Station, you know, that even though that does not have a residential component, you know, that is also has begun to function as a TOD. But yes, it's basically higher density development that relies more heavily on access to transit for people who are either living there, working there, or visiting there.
Okay, thank you. One more. This one's for Whitney. Didn't we just do, parking is mentioned there, didn't we just do commercial parking? Was that strictly only for restaurants? We had Lee Cannon do some parking math.
Yes, we did revise our whole parking ordinance, and that has been shared with Tim Brahan.
Okay, great. As long as we're not going
But
off
if
in
there
two
was
different
other
directions.
things that we needed to take into consideration, I think that's the idea for just opening the discussion here. It did include revising the parking code for restaurants, and there were several other uses, but we looked at roughly all of our current code requirements for that.
Okay,
Generally speaking, we lowered the required parking by 20% and then put a maximum of anything over 20% of the required parking required specific approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Yeah.
great, thanks very much.
And from the standpoint of the architectural design guidelines, we would see opportunities for providing guidance on things like how is required parking located on site, how does it relate to front door of a building, how does the front door of the building relate to the street, are there adequate pedestrian connections, landscaping. So it's really less about I wouldn't, although we could, if there is a need, get into discussions of actually minimum or maximum parking requirements. I don't think we will need to, but it's really more about how the parking is designed.
And I recall when we had the conversations around commercial corridors of parking in the front or the rear, and that was a big part of that conversation. So do we want to be more like Maplewood, or do we want to be more like the current community center with all of the parking in front of the skating rink? So,
Thank you.
anything else, Mr. Moran?
Great.
Mr. Carlin?
Thank you. And actually, that triggered a thought that along those exact lines, I'm definitely in favor of some regulations that would maybe increase the green space and parking. And as far as stormwater goes, I know MSD, the local jurisdiction, has some pretty restrictive already. So I'm not sure if we just were implementing those, maybe we'd be okay as far as stormwater and green. Relative to the parking, though, I was going to say exactly that. Like and we have plenty of meetings to discuss this. I was looking at my list of meetings in your, but the idea, as you mentioned in Rock Hill, and also where like we have Chipotle up over by the quick, the idea that, and I've come across this as an architect multiple times, that you want the building on the street, but in fact, if it's a transit-oriented, car-centric, facility, I feel, pretending that the front door is where it is sort of not beneficial. So I think we can talk about that in detailed meetings. But the Rock Hill example to me is actually a large failure, not a success, right? So I would like to maybe avoid some of that. I'll hold my thoughts. I'll come up with some more questions in a second.
We have the advantage of having a number of ARB members on the commission to tap into their expertise, but they also get a lot of bites at the apple. So, Mr. Foreman, I think you wanted to say something.
I'm curious about the Metrolink overlay. I like that. There's two other thoughts. One is this is strictly the train overlay. It's not a bus.
Correct.
And then also, it would, just as the presentation goes on, especially public presentations, being an architect, I know there are metrics around density of residential per square mile that inform the viability of different kinds of public transit.
Yes.
So essentially what that would, some of those metrics may help people benchmark where we are.
That's a great point. Yes, sir.
So residential neighborhoods like ours, even though they're the smaller lots, aren't dense enough to support adding a train line into Brentwood. It would be a multifamily residential development, as we saw in some of the propositions along Manchester Road, that would move the needle on that type of development.
Mr. Cron?
Reminds me that we did have, I think one of the first motions before us, and we joined the board, was a apartment complex in the industrial court along Hanley.
Yep.
And that seemed like a perfect location for such a thing, because as the light industrial or commercial either dries up or changes focus, moves along, we have some spaces that could be, I think, well filled with that sort of project. And so I remember being in favor of the project then, and I would remain in favor of it now, especially given the look at the transit as you're showing it. So
We've had a number of petitions in front of us as well, as existing businesses are looking to shift based on drive-through versus walk-in versus dine-in. And I think that that's something, as we think about parking requirements going forward, as we've been talking about, that's a shift that is not going away. We thought it might, but it is not. And again, we continue to see those. The other thing I noted there was lighting. We have had in front of this commission a conversation around the Dark Skies Initiative and some of the work. I know the Sustainability Commission has been, or a subcommittee has been interested in that as well. So I think that's certainly something worth considering. Although I think this commission's belief was for new construction, not necessarily retrofitting existing construction, if I remember correctly. Any other comments from commissioners? Maybe, if it's a pear or something.
It was very informative to see slide 23 with the special overlays. But backing up and comparing that to the zoning, and then thinking about how the traffic moves through our city, it makes me wonder if we should be considering any sort of addressing the Hanley Road corridor that's mostly light industrial. So that didn't come up during previous steering committee meetings, but now I'm more curious actually seeing the overlays put together, that we seem to have left out a significant corridor in the city from the discussion. And maybe that's a bridge too far for this round, but.
No, I think it's a good point, and I think that there's potentially several ways that it could be handled. One way is that as those properties in what is currently the industrial zoned areas, as they might transition over to more then they would be subject to commercial design guidelines. There could also be some sort of an interim strategy for those industrial uses as they might continue to exist, or as industrial uses, new industrial uses come in, and then I think whatever's considered for the Hanley Road corridor does need to be some consideration for potential future.
What currently separates the Hanley Road corridor from this conversation? I don't know. Is there
Nothing in particular. Only that in terms of the way that the project was developed by the city, it was really to focus on the two commercial subdistricts from the comprehensive plan as for the commercial side of the design guidelines. Whitney, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that at all, but.
Yeah. We did discuss including the light industrial district as part of a focus during our steering committee.
Right.
So we can look at that because it's really pretty built out. I think in the comprehensive plan is looking for specific change along the South Brentwood Boulevard. I was kind of focusing on that area. And then how we want to continue the MC district along the Manchester corridor. If we want to have that as a distinct area outside of the MC district or not, that's where I was headed towards that. But we did talk about including the Hanley Industrial Court area as part of a particular focus because it is also transitioning. The comprehensive plan talks about a more business park, multi-use with residential, but then you also have industrial mixed in with there. So that is a transition, and we can certainly include that in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the simple answer to the question is it's going to be included in some. It's going to ultimately be included in some capacity. So.
And do you think with the proximity of residential to those corridors, right, that's something that we've discussed a great deal in this commission as well, is that it creates a pretty unique character that the Hanley corridor doesn't have to deal with.
one other thought? Mentioned transit-oriented development. Will we be able to, again, many meetings to come, we'll be able to have discussions around additional modes of transportation, highly bike lanes,
Sure.
things like that, which we clearly have none of at the moment. We have some trails through town, but just thinking of, pedestrian, bike, and, increased safety, which we've made some strides along Manchester with the crosswalks, just having that on the agenda.
Yeah, I think the proximity to the Greenway, I'm not sure how that would impact architecture, but I think that's worth understanding. If we're looking at the character of Brentwood, it's obviously been a big focus of the city with the development that they've done and parks. So that's something that I know a lot of us take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gentlemen, anything? I don't know if we're taking public comment this evening. Are we ready to? Any members of the public that wish to ask a question while our consulting company is here? Please. Mr. Harding.
Harding, 8881 Flamingo Court again. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place, but our representatives in Ward 1, Sharon and Sully, I keep approaching them in the Brentwood Forest meetings because I enjoy living in Brentwood, and as long as my wife and I can navigate the hill and dale of Brentwood Forest with our dog, we're pleased to stay there. But once we phase out of that, and scanning the room, I'm a lot closer than all of you, I would prefer to phase out and die in 63144. And currently there is no assisted living and or phasing in property. I mean, right across the street There is, all the surrounding communities have one or more. We drive to Kirkwood every day to walk around the lake with our dog, and we pass maybe a dozen different senior centers, that type of thing. But 63144 has none. And I'm not getting answers or direction on where to go with that or how appropriate it is with this plan. Or is Greenway exploring concepts, or I don't know where to go. So if you can give me guidance on what to do, I'm not getting it from Sully or Sharon either.
I'm not sure I can give you guidance, but I will tell you that it's noted, and we can have that conversation. And part of it is looking at developers. I have some personal understanding of that since my mother is in Webster and not in Brentwood. But
Okay. Thank
I
you,
would
sir.
prefer she's a little closer.
Thank you.
But I appreciate it. Thank you. Any other members of the public? All right. Anything else? Actually, excuse me. Yep, Mr. Frankie. Please. You're also a member of the public sometimes.
Yeah, Whitney actually asked me to hang around. She said, "Don't tear off to McDonald's just yet, just to listen." And I have a few comments,
Please.
just kind of from what I've heard, based on our work in Brentwood, be it in this capacity on the Brentwood Bound project and some other things. First item is the maps. I couldn't tell, but they probably should be updated to reflect the new Brentwood Bound work in that park. I don't know if you capture that as industrial or not when you were doing your zoning stuff and your land cover. There's a plan, the city has a plan called the Rogers Greenway Master Plan. And I think that this plan should look at that specifically about new housing replacement or improvements in that greenway area so that we don't create problems for that future greenway, like we have garage doors that go on to the greenway where we can't have trails and things like that. That was kind of an important thing when that plan was developed. We talked about landscape, or we heard about landscape. One of the things that we hear, and I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission in Richmond Heights, are BMPs and the character of BMPs and the appropriateness of the design of the BMPs based on where they're placed on the site. For example, if you need a BMP, and a lot of times they're always located at along the road, sometimes it's not necessarily appropriate that they look very wild. Sometimes it's more appropriate for them to look more manicured, depending on the design. So that's something the plan might want to take into consideration. And finally, with regard to the Manchester MC District, as it's on the east side of Brentwood Boulevard, going back to when the plan for the Manchester corridor was developed streetscape-wise, there was kind of a strong concept to unify that visually so that when you entered that corridor, you knew you were in Brentwood. Signs are black, certain characteristics. And so it might be worth considering that sort of visual unity goes all the way through that corridor so that when you're in Brentwood, you'd feel like you're in Brentwood. So that's all that, just from hearing the initial things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Frankie. One. Staff report, or director's report, sorry, not staff report. The director's report, I think that's where we're at. I see no alderman, so I will skip the aldermanic report.
So, again, Tim Brahan will be back, but if you have any other further design considerations you would like to consider, please email me those. We will always be taking public comments. And then I will pass them on to Tim for him to consider. You know, we've had some discussions on the apartments and the design of that and how much we want to carry forward from the MC district. So if you have any thoughts on those, feel free to email me and we can share that. He will obviously be back. So I am, for the next meeting is May 8th. I have not gotten any specific applications, but I know some are pending or coming in soon, so we will try to get them on the agenda if we can for review. And we'll go from there.
Any other business from the commission? We're seeing none. No motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
You have a second? Second by Mr. Hunt, I believe. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We stand adjourned. All